From the moment my father passed away, everything in our home changed. The silence he left behind was deafening, especially in the corner of the living room where his cherished piano stood untouched. Dust gathering softly on its once gleaming. Keys like time quietly mourning his absence. My father, Daniel Whitmore, had been a well-respected pianist, not famous by the world's standards, but a legend in the community, playing at every wedding, church service, and even the occasional jazz night at the old hall downtown. Music flowed through him like breath itself.
Oh.
The piano wasn't just an instrument to him.
Oh.
It was an extension of his soul, a medium through which he shared his most unspoken emotions. Every evening, like clockwork, he'd sit before it, hands gliding effortlessly over the keys, and the house would fill with notes that felt like home. My sister Eliza, older by 3 years, had inherited most of his musical talent, so everyone said.
Oh, wait.
She was confident, always performing at school recitals, winning praise, basking in admiration, while I was the quiet one, the observer. I never dared to touch the piano when Dad was alive, not out of fear, but out of reverence. That piano belonged to him, like a throne reserved for a king. After his funeral, I found myself staring at it more often, the silence pulling me closer, like it was calling out to be played, to be remembered. But whenever I reached toward it, Eliza would scoff, toss her auburn curls and say something cutting like, "Don't even think about it, you'll break it," or "That's not your place." At first I backed off, feeling as though maybe she was right, that I had no claim to that sacred space, that the piano belonged to her legacy, to their shared talent. But something inside me, perhaps a fragment of Dad's spirit, refused to stay silent. I started sneaking into the living room at night when the world was asleep, lifting the heavy fallboard with trembling hands and pressing the keys gently, afraid they would scream from years of neglect. They didn't. Instead, they welcomed me, soft and melancholy, whispering long-lost melodies I didn't know I knew. Each note seemed to unlock something buried deep within me, as though the music had always been waiting inside my chest, aching to be released. My fingers stumbled, untrained and clumsy, but with every visit they grew bolder, more confident. I didn't read music. I played by instinct, by memory, by emotion. I remembered the way Dad's hands moved, his pauses, his flourishes, his crescendos, and I began to imitate them. Not perfectly, but with heart. The more I played, the more I felt like I was reaching him, having conversations across time and death. It wasn't long before I composed my first piece, a sorrowful tune that swelled with loss, but ended in hope. I played it 100 times in secret, polishing it like a gem I never intended to show anyone. And yet, fate has a way of dragging hidden things into the light. Asterisk, it was a Sunday afternoon when everything started unraveling. It's a kind of lazy, golden day where sunlight trickled through the curtains like honey, casting long shadows across the floorboards and bathing the piano in a nostalgic glow. My mother had invited a few relatives over for tea, people who had known my father well.
I'd bet!
People who hadn't set foot in our house since the funeral. They brought with them that awkward air of forced condolences and fragile memories, avoiding the obvious absence that hung in the air like a ghost. Eliza, always the showpiece of the family, perched on the edge of the couch in her pristine dress, flashing smiles and saying all the right things while I lingered in the background like I always did, watching from the fringe, clutching a lukewarm cup of tea I hadn't sipped. The conversation eventually turned, as it always did, to my father and his music. Uncle Martin asked if anyone had touched the piano since Daniel passed. Before I could even open my mouth, Eliza chuckled. "Of course not. No one dares." Sacred, right? Then her gaze flicked toward me for a moment, sharp mocking, and she added, "Well, except for Liam here." I caught him tinkering with it one night. It was adorable. A ripple of laughter passed around the room, light-hearted and dismissive. I stared at the carpet, cheeks burning. My mother looked mildly surprised, maybe even amused, as though the idea of me playing the piano was some kind of inside joke she hadn't been let in on. "You," she said, with a hint of disbelief. "I didn't know you were interested in music, sweetheart." I wanted to answer her, to explain that I wasn't just interested, that I felt something powerful when I played, that music was no. Longer just sound to me, but a voice I'd never known I had. But the words crumbled before they reached my throat. Eliza leaned back, sipping her tea like she had sealed the moment with her smug commentary. That evening, when everyone had left and the dishes were drying, I went to the piano again. Didn't sneak this time. Sat openly, staring at the keys. Hearing my heart beat in my ears, my hands hovered for a moment, trembling. Before I began to play the piece I had written, the one carved from midnight grief and hopeful echoes, the music filled the room, haunting and beautiful, stretching out like wings unfurling in a storm. My mother walked in midway through, silent as a ghost. She didn't say a word, but I felt her stop behind me. I kept playing, eyes closed, heart exposed until the last note dissolved into the silence. When I turned, her face was wet with tears. "Where did you learn that?" she whispered. "I didn't," I said. "It came from Dad. I just remembered it differently." That moment should have changed everything. But it didn't, because the next day, Eliza found out. Eliza had this way of controlling the narrative in our house, an effortless gift for rewriting moments in her favor. So when she walked into the living room the next morning and saw my mother wiping fingerprints off the piano keys, her entire face tightened. "Did someone play last night?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral, but laced with suspicion. "My mother didn't look up, Liam," she said. "He played something beautiful. It made me think of your father." Eliza raised an eyebrow, lips parting slightly in disbelief, before snapping back into a grin that felt more like a warning. "Liam, seriously? What did he play? Chopsticks?" My mother didn't reply. Eliza studied her for a beat longer, then turned and stormed upstairs. I knew the storm was brewing even before I heard the sharp slam of her bedroom door. I was in my room, headphones in, replaying the recording I'd secretly made of last night's session. Had started doing that weeks ago, recording my sessions late at night, not because I thought anyone would care, but because the music felt too precious to lose. I had no sheet music, just the movements of my fingers and the sounds I sculpted out of the silence. And though I hadn't dared tell anyone, I had written over a dozen original pieces, each one echoing some hidden part of me I couldn't speak. Out loud, they weren't perfect, but they were mine. Liza barged in without knocking. "What are you doing?" she barked. I yanked out my earbuds, startled. "Nothing. Just listening." Her eyes narrowed. "To what?" "That ridiculous thing you played last night." I didn't answer. She walked over and snatched the phone out of my hand, clicking into the recording app. Her face twisted as she listened. "You really think this is music?" she asked, voice sharp with venom. "It's noise. Pretentious garbage. You're embarrassing yourself." She tossed the phone onto my bed and crossed her arms. "Don't even think about playing that again when people are around. You're not Dad. You'll never be Dad." I didn't argue. I couldn't. Her words struck like lightning, searing something inside me I didn't know could still burn. Eliza had always held our father's musical legacy like a trophy that only she was worthy to polish. She had taken piano lessons from him, learned classical pieces, entered competitions, and I was the quiet shadow in the room, the invisible, a sibling who watched and absorbed and stayed silent. My music came from emotion, not instruction, from aching solitude, not scales. But Eliza didn't care about any of that. She cared about appearances, about being the chosen one, the musical heir, the prodigy. My playing my very existence as a musician threatened that illusion, and she wasn't about to let it crumble. Later that day, I found that my notebooks of scribbled ideas, chord patterns, and lyrical fragments had been torn to pieces and shoved into the bathroom trash. My mother never said a word about it. I retrieved the scraps, fingers shaking, and tried taping them back together. Some were too shredded to salvage. I sat there for hours, staring at the jagged bits of my heart lying broken on the floor, and in that moment, I understood something painful. I could either fight to prove myself, or I could disappear again. But I was tired of disappearing. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow in my room felt like a memory I didn't want to touch. The walls echoed with silence, the kind that presses against your ribs until breathing feels like defiance. I sat up in bed, staring at the ceiling fan rotating slowly like a metronome, keeping time for a song I hadn't yet written. My thoughts drifted to my father, how he used to play late into the evening, the way the house filled with sound that made even the worst days feel gentle. I remembered watching him through the cracked doorway when I was little, his back straight, shoulders, loose hands floating over the keys like he was conducting the stars. He never knew I was there. He never knew how the music etched itself into my bones. And now, with him gone, the only thing I had left was the memory of how it felt to sit quietly in the shadows and listen. But the fire Eliza lit in me earlier wouldn't go out. I couldn't let her bury my voice beneath hers again. Not anymore. Got out of bed, crept downstairs, and sat at the piano. The keys felt colder tonight, almost reluctant to respond. My fingers hovered, trembling. Before pressing down gently into the opening chords of a piece I hadn't played for anyone yet, not even myself. It wasn't one of Dad's compositions. It wasn't classical. It wasn't something you'd find in any lesson book. It was raw, grieving, alive. The notes didn't follow rules, they followed emotions, bending and breaking in all the ways grief does when it's too big to hold. As the music swelled, I felt something loosen in my chest. I thought of the ripped pages in the trash, of the tears my mother had wiped from the piano bench months ago, of the aching silence that had replaced my father's laughter. I poured it all into the keys, every fractured thought, every dismissed dream, every shadow I'd swallowed just to survive. I didn't know how long I played. Maybe an hour, maybe more. When I finally lifted my hands from the keyboard, the room was thick with emotion, the kind of silence that follows a prayer. And when I turned around, I saw my mother standing in the hallway, her eyes shimmering, one hand clasped over her mouth. I didn't know she had been listening. That was him, she whispered, stepping forward. But it was also you. Her voice cracked. You've been hiding this? I nodded, unsure what to say. She sat beside me on the bench and took my hand. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not just as the younger sibling, not as the quiet one, but as someone with something real to offer: a presence, a voice, a musician. In that moment, the air in the house shifted. Something heavy lifted. Peace doesn't last long in a house built on favoritism and buried grief. Upstairs, I heard Eliza's bedroom door creak open. Her footsteps were soft, hesitant, and I knew somehow I had broken the fragile story she had written about who we were supposed to be. The morning after that silent revelation brought no words of confrontation, no applause, no argument, just a thick, awkward quietness. Breakfast felt like a stage set too early, everyone in costume but no script in hand. My mother moved slowly. In the kitchen, her eyes lingering too long on the coffee pot, the toaster, the floor. Eliza sat across from me at the table, hair pulled back too tightly, face unreadable. She didn't say anything about what she may or may not have heard, but her fingers kept tapping against the side of her orange juice glass like she was playing. A rhythm only she could understand, one that was out of sync with the rest of us. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the invisible wall forming between us. But the fear of misstepping kept me quiet. For days we danced around each other like strangers sharing a stage they didn't audition for. But things were changing. Beneath the surface. Slowly. The next time I sat at the piano, I didn't wait until the house was asleep. I sat down after dinner, while dishes clinked in the sink, and began to play, this time a delicate piece I'd been working on since I was 12, one that never quite felt finished. The melody had always come to me in fragments, like a puzzle whose corners kept shifting. But now, for the first time, I saw the full picture. I let it guide me. My fingers flowed without hesitation. I could feel my father in every measure, his presence lingering in the chords, his breath echoing in the rests. It was as if I had finally picked up the conversation we had left unfinished the day he died. This time it wasn't just my mother who listened. Eliza stood at the edge of the living room, arms folded, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. It's not disdain, not awe, something between disbelief and realization. When the final note faded into the silence, I turned toward her, waiting for the inevitable remark. But she said nothing. just nodded, once, sharply, and disappeared upstairs.
I didn't follow her.
I didn't need to. That, nod reluctant as it was a crack in her armor, a sign that the story was changing, but with every note I played, I felt a new burden growing in the pit of my stomach. The music was no longer just a secret I kept from the world. Now it was something visible, something powerful. Power always attracts expectation. Whispers began circulating in school. People had seen a video on my mom secretly filmed during that late-night performance and shared on her private Facebook page. A friend of hers posted it publicly. Suddenly, classmates I hadn't spoken to in years were stopping me in the hall, complimenting me, asking questions. A few teachers brought it up. One even suggested I consider the school's upcoming talent showcase. My instinct was to shrink back into the background, to vanish into the familiar shade of Eliza's spotlight. But that wasn't who I was anymore. At least, not entirely. The piano was no longer just my sanctuary, it was my voice. For the first time, I was beginning to believe that voice deserved to be heard. Even if it meant stepping out of my sister's shadow. Even if it meant walking straight into the tension that had always existed between us. I wasn't sure where it would lead, but I knew the path had already begun. The hallway outside the auditorium smelled like floor polish and nerves. I clutched, my hands together, trying to keep them from trembling. But the sweat slicking my palms refused to let me pretend I wasn't terrified. The talent showcase was never something I imagined being a part of. Liza had performed in it every year since she was a freshman, dominating the stage with her big voice and magnetic presence. She was the kind of person who made spotlights. Chase her, I was more comfortable in shadows. But here I was, minutes away from walking out in front of hundreds of students. Teachers, parents, even a few local reporters from a community blog because someone had seen something in that grainy piano video that they insisted the world needed more of. Eliza hadn't spoken to me directly about the performance. She hadn't even offered her usual passive-aggressive remarks about how I was finally doing something brave. Or milking the sympathy card. But I'd noticed a shift in her. Lately, less hostility, more distance, like she was trying to figure me out from afar. I could live with that. It's better confusion than contempt. My name was announced. The curtain trembled. I stepped into the light, the quiet murmur of the crowd settling into a stillness that felt heavier than silence. I sat at the piano without. Looking up, my heart thudded like a bass drum in my chest. And then I began. I didn't play the flashy song everyone expected. The complex arrangement that had gone semi-viral or the dramatic piece my dad used to play. Instead, I played something I had written, something raw and unfinished and unpolished, still growing in my fingers and heart. It was a piece about longing, about being invisible, about holding grief in your chest like a second set of lungs, about hearing laughter when all you needed was a hug. As I played, I forgot about the audience. I forgot about my sister, my mom, even the stage itself. It was just me and the piano, speaking a language we both understood. I came trembling. Beautiful. When the final note landed, I lifted my hands slowly. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, was reverent. Then the clapping began soft at first, then swelling like a wave. I looked up finally. The front row was a blur of tears and phone cameras. Some people were standing, and there, near the aisle, was Eliza. She wasn't clapping. She wasn't smiling. She was just staring, jaw slack, eyes wide, one hand pressed against her chest like I had reached in and plucked something fragile from inside her. That night, she didn't make fun of me. She didn't speak at all until we were home. I was in my room, still riding the high and confusion of the performance. When she knocked something she hadn't done in years, she walked in slowly, holding something in her hands. A yellowed folder. I recognized it instantly. Our dad's old sheet music, the pieces he wrote but never shared. She sat beside me on the bed without asking. "I found these in the attic," she said, her voice low and uneven. "I thought maybe you could finish some of them. You'd know what he meant better than I ever could." I took the folder from her carefully, like it might burn me. My fingers trembled again, but this time, not from fear. "Why now?" I asked. She hesitated. "Because tonight, I heard him in your music." For the first time since he died, I felt like he was really here, and it broke me. Her voice cracked. I used to think you'd never understand what he gave me, but maybe I was the one who didn't see what he gave you. I didn't reply, just leaned my head against her shoulder, and for a long time we sat in the quiet siblings, not rivals, not broken kids, clinging to different fragments of a man we both missed, just two hearts learning how to beat in harmony for the first time.